guys, I'm Heidi, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about all the books that I read in May and June. I know I've been gone for a while, I haven't disappeared, I've just been really busy with work and I haven't really had the time or energy to film any videos, but I have been reading quite a lot, so today I'm going to be sharing some of my thoughts on these books with you guys. So first of all, in May I finished Heartstopper Volume 4 by Alice Oseman. This is a YA graphic novel about two boys, Nick and Charlie, who become friends and then fall in love. I like this one a lot better than the previous volume. Volume 3 was cute, but I found myself craving something more than just cute. And Volume 4 had a lot more substance to it, which I really liked. It was very wholesome and it handled difficult mental health related topics well, so I really enjoyed it. I was actually a little bit surprised at how much I enjoyed it. So if you like this series, then I would definitely recommend Volume 4 as well. I then finished reading The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu, and I read this as part of the Genre Raiders book club. This was the May pick for the book club. It's a short story collection and most of these stories are either fantasy or science fiction related. Most people seem to really love it, but it was a 3.5 star-ish read for me. I thought most of these stories were good, but I wasn't blown away. The stories were cleverly constructed and the writing was good, but I found that none of them really left an emotional impact that would last. And that was despite all the brutality and torture scenes in some of these stories. This is actually a word of warning as well to people who might want to pick this one up. It does get quite violent and brutal in some of these stories, so just if you don't find yourself comfortable reading these types of things, then you've been warned. But I think the fact that I didn't really enjoy it as much as I thought I would was also maybe partly connected to the fact that these stories were mostly centered on very similar topics. And I think I maybe also shouldn't have read this as I would a novel. I maybe should have spaced out my reading a little bit. So I think my enjoyment was at least partly connected to how I was reading this. But all in all, it was enjoyable, but not amazing. I then finished reading 2 more graphic novels. Both of them were the Adventure Zone graphic novels. So the first one was Here There Be Gerblins by the McElroys, and it was illustrated by Carey. This is a graphic novel that is based on a podcast that is hosted by 3 brothers and their dad as they play Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop RPGs. It's definitely my favorite podcast, and Clint McElroy, who is the dad, has done such a good job adapting what is essentially a wholly audio-based medium into a visual one. And I also really love Carey Pietsch's art style. This volume, like the first arc in the podcast, is mostly introductory. We join Taco, the elf wizard, Meryl, who is a dwarf cleric, and Magnus, who is a human fighter, as they go on various adventures, and they are mostly quite ill-equipped to deal with these adventures. And they're being guided by their snarky dungeon master, who is also a character in this graphic novel. It's very well done, and I actually read this before listening to the podcast. This was a reread for me, so I'm actually really happy that I decided to pick this up because this is what got me into the podcast in the first place. So I'm really happy I discovered this, and I was really enjoying my reread as well. I'm rereading the first 3 volumes of these graphic novels in preparation for the 4th graphic novel, which comes out in July this year. And I also finished reading the 2nd volume in this series called Murder on the Rockport Limited, which is basically a continuation of Taco's, Merle's and Magnus's adventures. This is a D&D railroad mystery that takes place on a train. And we're also introduced to some very interesting side characters. There's a genius child detective, there is an axe-wielding professional wrestler, there is a pair of meat monsters, there's a surly wizard, and there's obviously also some magical artifacts. There is also a much larger plot surrounding it all, and it was another very fun read. I've also been reading the Tawny Man trilogy by Robin Hobb, and in May I finished The Golden Fool, which is the second book in the series. I've said this before, but I would definitely recommend people to read the Farseer trilogy and the Liveship Traitors trilogy before starting the Tawny Man trilogy. It will just give you a much richer appreciation of the world and of the characters if you read these two series before starting this one. There are recurring characters even from the Liveship Traitors trilogy, which is not really even directly related to Fitz's story, so I would definitely recommend you to read these series in order. The Golden Fool was very, very slow, and it was almost entirely focused on character development. Fitz has definitely grown as a character, and I absolutely loved seeing his interactions with other characters, especially Thick, who is a very powerful skill user with a mental disability. I enjoyed this book more than Fool's Errand, which is the first book in the series, and I am definitely going to continue with the series, and I can't wait to read the third book. And finally, in May, I finished Traitors Moon by Lynn Flewelling. This is the third book in the Night Runner series, and again we follow rogues and thieves Alec and Sergil as they go on various adventures. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this because it is the third book, but I like this a bit less than the first two books. The adventurous, roguish elements of the story that were so well done in the first two books were largely absent in this one. There wasn't as much sneaking and spying and stealing as in the first two books, and it just wasn't as fun. Instead, there was a lot of political intrigue, which I usually like in fantasy, but it kind of made the book very slow, and I don't think slow suits this series very well. I also think the author overdid it with the fantasy names a bit this time. There were so many, and it was really difficult to keep track of them all. I still gave it 4 stars because the world and the characters are enjoyable to read about, but I didn't really enjoy this as much as the first two books. And then in June, I finished Shadow's Return by Lynn Flewelling, which is the 4th book in the Night Runner series. This was quite a tough read. Without spoiling anything, Alec and Sergil spent most of the book in a very difficult situation. And halfway through the book, I got a bit tired of it because it was basically endless suffering for them both, and it went on for quite a long time. I wasn't really bothered by the content as much as I thought I would be, but I was a bit bored and I wanted things to move along a bit quicker. But the pacing was a lot better than in the 3rd book, and it also introduced an interesting new magical element, which I'm quite intrigued about, so I am still very much looking forward to reading the 5th book. I also finished Underland by Robert Macfarlane. This is a non-fiction book about the Earth's underworlds as they are in myth, memory, geography and literature. The author described our relationship with darkness and burial and in general what lies beneath the surface. And it also includes stories made by people throughout history who have been drawn because of various reasons towards the Underland. I listened to this on audio, which was a mostly enjoyable experience, and I liked the author's writing style, although there were points where I found my mind wandering a little bit. Still, I would definitely recommend this to those who usually enjoy atmospheric nature writing. I then finished Tower of Thorns by Juliet Marillier, which is the 2nd book in the Blackthorn and Grimm series. I buddy read this with Chris from Chris Bookish Cauldron, and once again we follow Blackthorn, who is a disillusioned healer, and her companion Grimm, who have settled in Dalriada. There they have to wait out the 7 years of Blackthorn's bond to a fae, who has tasked Blackthorn with living in Dalriada, helping anyone who asks for her help, and not to go looking for revenge on a very evil man who has wronged Blackthorn in the past, or basically ruined her life. In this one, Blackthorn and Grimm are approached by a noblewoman who needs help expelling a screaming creature from an old tower on her land. The tower is surrounded by a hedge of thorns, and midsummer is approaching, which is the only time when the creature can be expelled. But there are also larger forces at bay, and Blackthorn and Grimm need to figure out what to do about the creature. This was another fairy tale-like story, much like the first one, which was called Dreamer's Pool, but I liked this one a bit better. I thought the monster storyline was quite interesting, and we also got quite a lot of Grimm's backstory, which I loved because I absolutely love Grimm's character. So all in all, another enjoyable book in this series, and I can't wait to read the third book. I also finished Home by Martha Wells, which is a short story set in the world of Murderbot. It is set after the events of Exit Strategy, which is the fourth book in the series, and it is told from the perspective of another character. And I really liked seeing Murderbot through the eyes of another. If you like Murderbot, then you will like this short story. I then finally finished 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City by K.J. Parker. I'd been meaning to read this for the longest time, and I finally decided to pick it up, and I'm so glad I did. This is the story of a Rome-like city under siege. The city has no time to prepare, the people have no food, they have no weapons, and the enemy wants to kill them all. Our protagonist Orhan is an outsider. He is an engineer, a colonel of engineers actually. He is a genius. He is very good at political and military strategy. And he is also a bit of an asshole, and he has a major problem with authority. He is basically the city's only hope, so he has to do what he can to save the city from the siege. I really like this. It was funny, it was witty, and I was totally engrossed in the story. It reminded me a little bit of The Martian by Andy Weir if it was set in a fantasy setting, but I like the protagonist here a lot more. He was snarky and kind of an asshole, but he got things done. And his narration was really fun to read. I haven't really read that many fantasy books where humor has been done well, but this was definitely one of them. The only thing that might put some people off are the very detailed descriptions of military strategy and how certain weapons and engines of war are used and constructed, because the main protagonist is an engineer. But none of this really bothered me at all. I absolutely love this. It was definitely a 4 out of 5 star read for me. And finally, in June, I finished North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. This was the June pick for the Genre Readers Book Club, and it's about a young woman named Margaret Hale. Her father is a pastor who decides to leave the church and the countryside and to take his family north to an industrial town named Milton, which was based on Manchester. There, Margaret witnesses the brutality of the Industrial Revolution. She witnesses the poverty and the hardship of the factory workers, and she develops a very keen sense of social justice. She also clashes with mill owner John Thornton, but obviously they're also both very attracted to each other. It was fine. It was a bit too long and boring, and it was also quite a sad and depressing read. There was quite a lot of death and disease and poverty and hardship in general. Like a lot of books written at that time, it was also very wordy and a bit melodramatic at times, but that didn't bother me too much, and I did enjoy it, sort of. I like the way the characters' inner thoughts were described, and the Industrial Revolution setting was definitely interesting. It was quite evident how this was supposed to be a social commentary on the North and the South, the new and the old, the past and the future, and so on. But it was ultimately a bit too long and drawn out, and I am glad that I've finally read one of Gaskell's books, but I'm also not in a hurry to pick up anything else by her. So all in all, I liked it, but I wasn't blown away. So these were all the books that I finished in the months of May and June. I hope you guys are doing well. I hope you're enjoying your summer, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!